This is the best of First and Last, the podcast, with Mike Golic Jr. and Robin Lundberg.
Mike, you know the NBA season is winding down when you see Tony Romo dribbling out on the court.
It's the time-honored tradition that I hope will now be the marker for the end of every NBA season, which is taking some sort of cross-sport transplant athlete and allowing them to trot on the court in a uniform that looks really uncomfortable on them because they don't really have the body or the tan to support it.
You know, I wonder if there's anybody who flipped on the game for a second and saw J.J. Barea and thought, oh, is Romo in there? I mean, because people were probably rooting for Romo to get in the game. That would have been interesting. Now, apparently Mark Cuban was trying to do that, but got shut down by the NBA due to not making a mockery of the sport and that the contract wouldn't be honored and all sorts of things like that. I suppose one of the questions is Tony Romo, like as polarizing as he's been, do you think that was the appropriate thing to do? Was he good enough to be honored as a Maverick for a day?
I think the real question is, did he improve the Mavericks roster by being out there based on what we had seen from them this season? But, I think this works. I didn't really understand people making a big stink about it one way or the other. It was a cool way for a guy, and Mark Cuban brought this up, that didn't really have a chance to get this curtain call moment in the football sense with this team because of the way their season went, because of the fact that they were contenders and Dak Prescott had been playing so well during that portion of the season. So a chance for a guy that for the most part sounds like he was pretty beloved in Dallas, at least appreciated, especially locally in that community. And it was low stakes outside of him actually getting in there and getting a jumper. We got to see the wonderful footage of the shoot-around in the morning where he came curling off a pick and hit one near the top of the key, much to the delight of everyone other than the defender who it was shot over, who I'm sure will get roasted from now until the end of time. But overall, I think this is a cool thing to do. It brought some attention to the Mavs, which we know Mark Cuban is not averse to at all, and did it in a way that, you're right, didn't really make a mockery of the game if you're concerned about all of those things, and gave Tony Romo that chance to stand up and get honored.
You know what would have been funny? I would have wanted to see him get in the game just to see if the other players, like the guys on the Nuggets, Wilson Chandler, let's say, if he would have let Tony Romo get a shot up or if he would have tried to embarrass him and thrown the shot right back in his face.
Oh, listen, you can't be the dude that lets Tony Romo get over on you. With Tony Romo's reputation around the NFL coming off some of his, we've talked about it, the things that are unfairly thrown his way in clutch moments. That's the last thing you want is Tony Romo hitting a step-back jumper over you and seeing that highlight till the end of time.
Now, some people did vouch for Tony Romo's bowling skills. Caron Butler said, believe it or not, man, when we were in the prime of our careers, I used to always talk about it. He could have easily been a professional basketball player. A lot of people were like, man, you're crazy for saying that, but Tony could shoot. He could handle the ball. He had a knack for scoring, man. That's some high praise because that's a hard league to make.
Well, but also him and Caron Butler played in the same high school area there, and Tony Romo was actually, I believe, the player of the year for basketball in high school over Caron Butler at that point. So he has sort of a unique insight into Tony Romo's skills on the hardwood.
We'll make that Straight Talk from Caron Butler, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, half the cost. Could have been not only the best quarterback in Dallas Cowboys franchise history, just kidding, Troy Aikman, but the best point guard in Mavericks history, just kidding, Steve Nash, Jason Kidd, others. Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest and most dependable networks. Here was Mark Cuban on Tony Romo's night with Mark Stein.
So, Mark, 2 minutes and change to go. Tony Romo makes his way down to check in, and you pulled him back. Why would you, of all people, stop him from going in this game?
Because I told him if he was going to go in, he had to stretch first, and he wouldn't stretch. And so I don't want to risk it. I mean, he's going to be an announcer. He could get hurt. That could ruin the rest of his career.
How did this all come about? Whose idea was this to put Tony Romo in a Mavericks uniform?
Tony and Dirk are really good friends. I've gotten to be friends with him. He came to our 30K dinner we had for Dirk, and I told him if we didn't make the playoffs, we'd try to get him a 10-day. I thought we were going to make the playoffs, but, it turned out the way it did, and so I kept my word.
And knowing you as I do, you really wanted to sign him for real, right?
Yeah, but, the powers that be decided otherwise.
How hard did you lobby for that, to actually sign him to a contract?
I asked him what the fine would be, but they had, with any contract, the league has to approve it, and it wasn't going to happen.
What was the conversation like with Jerry Jones to let – I know you let him know that this was all going to be going on.
Yeah, it was quick and easy. Jerry was all for it. I just wanted to be respectful and just let him know what was going on so he didn't get blindsided.
Last thing, how antsy was Romo watching the game there next to you? How much was he lobbying to get in there?
Oh, he was dying, right? He was dying. Then it got to the end, and he started to get up a couple times, and he realized he was a little bit stiff. And so I would have loved it, but, we're entertainment first, but it was great for the Mavs fans. And look, the reality was, of all the things, Tony really didn't get a chance to finish out his career the way everybody who loves him as a Dallas Cowboy would have liked. He didn't get a chance to leave the field the way he would have liked. And because we're friends, because he and Dirk are so close, this is really a chance to show tribute. We've done it with Madonna, Aikman, Pudge, people who are icons in Dallas. And so the opportunity really to just let him just soak it all in. He didn't get that chance, and that was wrong, so we wanted to give him that opportunity.
Because, let's face it, the NBA is doing its darndest to make a mockery of the end of the season. Like today, there are some stories today that really go, I don't really care, I guess, that much, because it's not like I'm tuning into these games or I think they matter that much anyway. But if you're looking for the fuel for the people who really are upset about all this, today is lighting a cigarette while pumping your gas. I mean, it's right there.
Exactly. This is orange mocha frappuccino written all over it right here. Some freak gasoline fight accident of the NBA season. And you're right, you can spin it one of two ways. You can say the NBA regular season is now so long and individual game-wise meaningless that you can throw Tony Romo in there and it won't matter. Or you can say that tanking has become such an issue that the Mavs decided that instead of making the playoffs, they wanted to tank so that they could get one of Dallas's most beloved stars who fell short of winning a championship a chance to go out there. And it's only fitting that risk of injury would be what ultimately kept Tony Romo off the court.
I was talking about yesterday shortening the season, which is the obvious no-brainer, duh. But then does that just move the timeline back, right? I mean, or do the games get more important? The games get more important, but if the seeding doesn't matter so much to these teams, then does it matter? Or would they prioritize the seeding more because there'd be less incentive to rest because there'd be less toll on the body?
Yeah, I think it'd be that sliding scale of risk, and also in those It's figuring out how much they can make that matter, because that's what your idea would be. Scarcity creating more drive for these individual games, more meaning when stars would sit out and rest. But, God, that is an interesting way to think about it. I think overall, if you removed more of those situations, because they're going to fall back so much on the science aspect of it, if you can remove a lot of those situations where you're putting someone at unnecessary injury risk, I feel like guys would be more inclined to say, I want to be out there, because that's your general disposition, is more often than not, you want to be out there with your team, you want to be out there playing. And so as long as you can remove some of those side doubts that have now crept into a lot of guys' heads, I think more often than not you'd find the guys on the court.
And when I reference the mockery aspect of it, well, the Celtics are playing for the number one seed. We know that. They're playing the Milwaukee Bucks, who are not playing anybody. They're not sending their players. But even bigger than that, because the Bucks are at least in the playoffs, the Brooklyn Nets tonight are resting. I mean, I could name some of the guys for you. I'll say Jeremy Lin and Brook Lopez. They're resting those two guys and some others.
They're stars.
Tonight. Yeah, in a game that does not matter to them other than, of course, pride, I suppose. But there's really no reason for them to be resting those guys on the surface. And there's a couple of things. There's a couple of ramifications to it. One, the Bulls, they're playing, because it could be them playing spoiler. And the Nets have played very well since Lin came back from injury. When they've had Lin and Lopez on the court together, they won only, I was looking at their schedule earlier today, they won one game between December 28th and March 1st when Lin was out for the big portion of that schedule there. But since March 1st, they were 10 and where's March 1st? They were 10 and 49 on March 1st. They're 20 and 61 right now. So they've played much better ball over that stretch and have played spoiler. They beat Chicago on Saturday, actually. So that could set up for at least an entertaining matchup in that regard. And people are going to go, what are you resting players for, vacation?
Yeah, getting an early start on that summer vacation. Something tells me the Bulls made a pretty enticing offer, and they were willing to listen to it.
Well, here's one of the reasons they're actually doing it. They get the Pacers' second-round pick if the Pacers miss the playoffs. So if the Bulls win and the Heat win and the Pacers lose, then the Nets get the Pacers' second-round pick. So I would have to imagine that's their number one reason for doing it, just to help the Bulls win. Maybe they're evaluating some guys to see if they can get a roster spot. Brook Lopez has an injury history throughout his career. Lynn had the hamstring injury. I don't know if they're trying to keep them healthy, but it does look ridiculous. And you know who's going to be really pissed about it?
Who?
Gamblers. Their over-under coming into the season was 20.5 in most places. They're at 20 wins right now.
That is just incredible how spot on Las Vegas continues to be. We're going to see another wing in the Mirage going up here pretty soon at this rate.
First and last, the podcast.
I'm still cracking up in the break that the Brooklyn Nets are resting players tonight. I mean, if that's it. That's the moment right there, right? That's the I guess we've had a few of them already this year, the Saturday night NBA games. But anytime it almost borders on parity, which it is right here, the team in dead last in the entire NBA that is playing for literally nothing, resting for no reason other than the off season where you get to rest, is resting its star players tonight against Chicago.
Yeah, I guess you could say so much for their happy ending. Yeah, no, it really is. It's sort of perfectly emblematic of what we've had, though, as I make an egregious. That's Avril Lavigne, right?
Oh, is that? I didn't know if that was your reference or you were referencing something else.
No, we're not. It's early. It's not that early, Robin.
It's late somewhere, right? I mean, it's early some places. It's very late in other places. It's late in the NBA season, and Jeremy Lin and Brook Lopez get to kick up their legs and rest for the off season. You know, it's funny because if I was a Nets fan, I'd actually be pretty upset about it. Well, I don't know about upset about it because Sean Marks has proven himself as a GM. Like, he's basically started to prove himself as a GM there. He's changed the culture in a lot of ways. People speak highly of the Nets now. He's very calculating. You can see he's smart. You can see he's going about it the right way and understands the situation they're in. So I'd be happy about that. And I guess I'd be happy about the calculated nature of him valuing the second-round pick from Indiana, or at least the possibility of getting the second-round pick from Indiana, and that being the incentive for this. But I'd be kind of bummed because my team only has one game left, and there was such a huge chunk of the season where I didn't get to see them play as well as they've been playing for a recent portion of it. Might as well give me one more competitive game, right? You know, just there's only one more left. Just give me that last competitive game. But alas, that will not happen. Now, as the games do get more competitive, Mike, there was a story yesterday I think caught both of our eyes, and it has to do with Steph Curry and the way Steph Curry is viewed throughout the NBA by his peers. He's had an interesting year because he's almost been off the radar this season. And it feels like people were quick to want to get him out of the paint, because when we're talking about the MVP seasons that people have had, a lot of people have just sort of dismissed Steph Curry and moved him right down the pecking order of the great players in the league when we're talking about a guy who's a back-to-back MVP.
And it's interesting to me, too, because it makes you remember just how much we fought his rise. A lot of people did because of the style of play that he really, I don't want to say made popular, but made it to where we started talking about this as a movement, this new age style of NBA basketball that's all of a sudden not only going to sweep the NBA, but affect the way the game is played at the grassroots level for kids coming up and how they're going to want. I mean, how often have we heard a proliferation of three-point shooting and run-and-gun basketball and AAU blamed on the Warriors and their style of play and what they made popular over their historic runs in the last couple of years, and all of that sort of fell on Steph Curry. And now on the back end in a season where, we talked about it the other day, he had the humility to defer to the new superstar that had joined up on their team to the point where, you know, maybe it's not like he stopped being a great player, but he was willing to be less in the limelight for the sake of this team and their overall success. And instead, it's created, instead of Curry mania, maybe the Curry backlash now to his superstardom in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened is we all got fooled, myself included, where Curry took a back seat to Durant and stopped controlling the ball as much. And once he's gotten his rhythm back with Durant down, he's been the same guy. I mean, he's been a beast down here to close the season, and you still remember the way he can handle the ball, the way he can pass the ball, obviously the way he can shoot it. And when you're talking about transforming the game and influencing players, he has influenced a lot. I mean, the shot I would say the most is the off-the-dribble three, the step into three off the dribble, which you see a lot of players taking. I was just referencing, Jeremy Lin takes a lot of those now. You know, those kind of shots that players weren't taking before because they weren't known to be as efficient as we've seen them become. Now people realize they can hit them at a rate that pays off, and I think Steph Curry is the main reason for that. But if you look at his splits, I mean, the guy has been absurd lately, and I'm wondering if he is poised for a supernova sort of allow me to reintroduce myself playoffs. But what we were referencing before was a portion of Marcus Thompson. He has a book out called The Miraculous Rise of Steph Curry. And in the book, it insinuates that LeBron and Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook are bothered by Curry and that he sort of leapfrogged people without paying his dues, I guess. We know that LeBron was bothered last year. I mean, that was painfully obvious. I think it was more that people were anointing Curry ahead of him, and he thought that was premature, and he let Curry know about it when he blocked some of his shots in the finals there. But there seems to be a phenomenon with Curry where, I guess because of the way there's just a lot of factors involved. You know, because he's so beloved, people will come watch him warm up. Because he does it in a little bit of a different way, and it's not physically overwhelming. There are people that don't accept it quite as quickly, and then there's that natural, I suppose, reaction to people saying he got too much attention and didn't accomplish enough to be put on that pedestal when these guys have been doing it for years, especially if you're referencing, say, Chris Paul.
Yeah, Chris Paul was one of the big ones that interestingly came up because they played the same position. We know LeBron and Steph weren't going to be comparable in a lot of ways with their skill set, but when you think about it, it makes sense because you're dealing with known versus unknown commodities. So Steph had been around in the league for a while. He was a guy that a lot of these players, I'm sure, thought they had a handle on where his lot in life would be in the NBA. And all of a sudden, when he steps outside of that, when he becomes someone that you can't just look at and appreciate, because Marcus Thompson talked about how LeBron used to go to Steph's games when he was at Davidson. And even early on, I remember seeing clips from when LeBron was with the Heat, and he'd see Steph at All-Star Weekend, and he'd be praising Steph Curry and talking about how much he enjoyed watching his game. But when all of a sudden that becomes a threat to your cash, when all of a sudden he starts taking food off your plate, the tune gets a little different, especially when it comes from a source that you're not prepared and not used to seeing in that same light.
It just feels like a meteoric rise, I guess, because Curry he looked like an all-star player, a very good player, obviously, all those things, and then all of a sudden it was transcendent. You know, this guy is back-to-back MVP. His team can't lose a game. They're in the finals. He has people at the warm-ups. I referenced that. That's like a big thing because you don't see that normally. He captured the imagination. And even in a quiet year, his jersey sales are right up at the top. So I wonder if we sort of slept on Steph Curry a little bit this year because I think some people are going to take this year and say, hey, it proves he's not quite where we had him. And I'm starting to wonder if we're not realizing what he's about to do in the postseason, and he is still the same player.
First and last.
We were talking about Steph Curry before. There's a school of thought that some of the veterans in the NBA feel a certain way about Steph Curry. He seems to have fallen out of favor this season, and I think Steph Curry might just be just as good as we all thought and had a quiet start to the season because head-to-head against some of these guys like Westbrook, against the Clippers, against the Rockets, he's gotten the best of those matchups all season long. And my only question would be the whole Durant dynamic. Again, as I've brought up before, when Durant comes back, does Steph Curry take a back seat again? Because I actually think the Warriors are at their best when Curry is the guy driving everything that's going on.
I think that's why I honestly think this Durant injury period has been the best thing for Steph Curry and the Warriors because there is something just to the mindset. And they talked openly about how Steph went out of his way to make sure that in a lot of ways Kevin Durant felt welcome into that situation. They realized what a tumultuous offseason had been. And so Steph Curry, as that team, one of the team leaders, took it on himself to make sure he incorporated him into the way they did things. But now you've got Steph Curry that got a taste of what it was like last year because we know with all these athletes, they hear the talk. They hear every bit of the chatter. And so I'm sure Steph Curry has heard, oh, he's a flash in the pan. It all really was just sort of a gimmick. And now he's in I would probably say he's in a mode where he's going to remind everyone just exactly like you said, allow me to reintroduce myself. And he's got a taste of that. He's got a bit of that moxie and that mojo back, and he's ready to go for the playoffs.
Let's put it this way. If you were to ask people right now who's the best player on the Warriors, a lot of people would say Kevin Durant. If you were to ask people right now who's the best between Westbrook, Harden, and Curry, a lot of people would put Curry third right now. And it feels like a far fall, I mean, as good as those guys are, from where he's been the last 2 years. And I'm not so sure he's not better than all those guys. Durant, Westbrook, and Harden. You know, it's one of those questions that's tough. You have to think about it a lot. But when he's at his best, and especially as I've seen them head-to-head, I probably take Curry over all those guys.
Yeah, it's perfectly emblematic of the NBA season where our likely MVP is going to be a guy who didn't start in the All-Star game. It sort of tells you everything you need to know about the whole conversation. But with Steph, it's interesting. I wonder, because obviously on the court, there's no denying, like we're having this conversation, that Steph is an otherworldly star on the basketball court as an NBA player, despite whatever the public narrative we've tried to force on him this season has been. But how much a lot of the off-the-court stuff has also bled into other NBA players disliking Steph Curry. A lot of the attention, we've seen him on late-night shows. We saw, his wife and daughter have become big-time stars in their own right and household names for a lot of people.
Which probably annoys people.
Yes.
That they're getting that attention, and Aisha's commenting on the NBA Finals and all stuff like that.
Yeah, you get all of that reaction, and backlash to overexposure comes up a lot, but I think you're right. When it comes as quickly as it did, to where all of a sudden it's just, all right, we decide that we love this family. Everyone else is probably sitting there like, man, I've been around doing this for a while. I got a family too. They're pretty nice. I like them a lot.
And people like to think of shooting as a fluke thing, right? It's not real. It's some sort of, he's cheating in a sense.
Yeah, look what the one thing we said was that, now this would make the NBA more accessible to kids because they look at Steph Curry's game and see that as an easier avenue over being a 6'7" phenom like LeBron James, implying that it's just easy to go out there and become one of the all-time greatest NBA shooters we've ever seen.
And you look at the size, and I get it, but it is hilarious. That take is hilarious because, first of all, the quickness that Steph Curry possesses and the ball handling that he possesses at the end, I don't think sometimes people realize what kind of athlete you're dealing with at the NBA level. So for him to be able to break guys off the dribble and get into the paint at will takes a certain level of athleticism. But then you just go to his background, right? I mean, there's all the wholesome stuff that people want to mock, and the way he looks, where he could look like he could fit in as a 12-year-old or something. But Steph Curry's dad played in the NBA. Steph Curry's brother plays in the NBA. Obviously, Steph Curry plays in the NBA. This is not some underdog tale of someone who came from nowhere and pulled himself up by his bootstraps and defied the odds despite physical limitations. Like, genetically as well, Steph Curry was born to play in the NBA.
Yeah, pedigree. We seem to ignore pedigree when it comes to Steph Curry. It's one of those things that's such an easy talking point for almost every other athlete that's part of a second-generation makeup. Steph Curry is the one that's been kind of immune to that. We don't seem to give him all the benefits of that the way we do a lot of other guys.
Let's go to Derek in Las Vegas. Derek, you're up first here on First and Last. Go ahead.
Hey, what's going on, guys? I'd like to go ahead and make a couple points on the whole Steph Curry debate. I look at Steph Curry, and you know what? I honestly see him as quite possibly the most expendable piece of that Golden State Warriors team. And the reason why is, you know what? Look at his contract. He was willing to take a back seat when he signed it. They went and signed Kevin Durant. He was willing to take a back seat when Kevin Durant came on board. If you look at their lineup between Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, out of all of those guys, you mean to tell me that if the Warriors were going to, say, go ahead and trade Steph Curry rather than pay him to a team, say, like the Phoenix Suns, where they would give you an Eric Bledsoe and a top 3 pick, that would not be tempting for the Warriors to do? Because you know what? It's a lot easier to replace a Steph Curry than it is somebody like a 6'10", 6'11" Kevin Durant.
Dude, they won 73 games without Kevin Durant, and with Harrison Barnes in his place last year. They won the title without Kevin Durant on that team.
Well, exactly. But you know what, though? When it comes to contract renegotiations, don't you think Kevin Durant and both Steph Curry are going to remember that?
Well, one of the
Curry's
reasons
gonna want to get
one of the reasons that
get paid like the alpha dog.
they were able to, well, I mean, look, there's only so much you can get paid in the NBA. We all know that. And one of the reasons the Warriors have been able to build the team that they've been able to build is how fortunate they've been to have Steph Curry's contract, 4 years, $44 million, probably the best bargain in all of sports. Of course, he's going to get a max deal. He deserves the max deal. Also, one of the reasons they were able to get him on that deal, though, is because he had the ankle injuries earlier in his career. Mike, just looking at raw plus minus, I don't know if you saw this stat, and obviously it's a flawed stat to simply use raw plus minus, but Steph Curry is currently, according to Ethan Strauss, plus 2,010 over his last 2 seasons of play. He's ranked in the top 2 in plus minus in 4 consecutive seasons.
Yeah, that sounds pretty replaceable to me.
Just get him out of there. Sean Livingston, step right up and fill the void left by Steph Curry.
First and last.
Lots of golf talk on Mike and Mike this week. And Booger McFarland was saying he could beat some old-time golfers. You told a golf story. You said your grandmother can beat you in golf.
My grandma's nice with it. So my grandma lives in one of those retirement communities out in Arizona where most people don't even have cars. They just have golf carts. You can get around like that. And they wake up and she's got her friends and plays golf every day. And I said, because we were talking about during the break if Booger could actually beat, I think Lee Trevino was the one they got on at the end of the show. Booger's campaign to try and get one of those old PGA, PGA senior tour guys to play golf with him. His hot take was he said he could beat Jack Nicklaus now. So Booger just doing what he could, using the Mike and Mike platform to try and get around to golf with one of these guys. Get it how you live. My point was he would get waxed by any one of those guys because, like my grandmother, their game is much too consistent. They're much too good in the places where you need to be good. Everyone says you build your golf game from the hole back. And my grandma, who I can bomb it off the tee. I'm a big guy. I'm much bigger than my grandma. She's a little old lady. But she hits every shot about 175 to 180 yards and straight as an arrow. And so she would absolutely take me out behind the woodshed in a round of golf, much like Lee Trevino or any one of these senior PGA guys would to Booger.
Which tees?
Which tees?
Like, is she playing red tees and you're playing black tees? What are we talking here?
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to account for the physical difference in some way. I mean, my God, I'm probably 200 pounds heavier than my grandma.
Just trying to paint a picture here.
You guys are gonna have to translate what you were just saying. I have no idea what you're even talking about.
That's the perfect encapsulation of this show.
Now, as far as your grandmother, first, shouts to her for being so good at golf. It also helps my golf's not really a sport argument, right? You know, that your grandma could beat you, that, Greeny, who's the biggest golf fan ever, is campaigning for 85-year-old men to vanquish Booger McFarland. Because I can get on my LeVar Ball here. I bet you I could beat Michael Jordan at basketball when he's 80. If I could freeze myself right now. Now, I'd also be older. So if I could take myself at 35 years old and he is 80, I bet you, or who's a really old guy who used to be really good at basketball?
I mean, Oscar Robertson's been in the news lately. Could you beat Oscar Robertson in a game
How
of
old is
one-on-one?
Oscar Robertson?
No,
I don't think I could beat. I've seen Oscar Robertson. He doesn't look like he's old and frail enough. I'm talking about when somebody gets like old and frail.
So you're talking about like basically someone who is like to the point in their life where they're either using a walker or in a wheelchair. That's when you think you can beat them.
Oh, Oscar Robertson's 78.
78 years old, and he'd be out here giving you buckets, Robin.
He'd be backing me down, that's for sure. So maybe 80's not quite old enough. But that was sort of a roundabout way to. Actually, we'll get to this another time because I know what we want to talk about here. I think I've found a way to somehow get through your golf is not a sport with a different analogy here, but we'll get to some of the things we actually want to talk about before I fix golf in your world. Okay, we will get to fixing golf a little bit later, but the NFL draft, that is, may have been influenced by Mike and Mike, that same pairing, Greeny and Booger McFarland, the last couple of days while you were out playing golf with your dad. And the reason is, I don't know if you guys saw this. We talked about it a little bit on the show yesterday. Myles Garrett, who was the favorite to be the number 1 overall pick, did not make an appearance on Mike and Mike the other day because he was upset with some things that Booger McFarland had said about him. A little bit of backlash ensued, questioning his toughness, his moxie, and all those things that would be questioned if you were to duck an interview as a college kid getting ready for the NFL draft. Coincidentally or not, Adam Schefter last night tweeted out that the Cleveland Browns are not certain who they will pick with the first pick in the draft and that they are debating between Garrett and Mitchell Trubisky, of course, the quarterback from North Carolina. Do you think that's coincidence that happened? Are we giving the show after us too much credit? Or is this just the nature of leading up to the NFL draft where things get leaked out and where teams reconsider on their own?
Robin, Mike and Mike's been influencing the sports world for 17 years now, so I don't think it's a far cry. Yeah, it's completely ridiculous to think that somehow this is weighed on the minds of NFL GMs because even in talking to producer guy Dan Z before the show, we understand that, yes, this is not a good look for Myles Garrett, I think, to go out there and duck that. He can talk about Booger having a bias towards certain things. Booger's one of the better college football analysts that we have. He's a guy that prides himself on actually watching and taking the time to seek these things out. And if he's got a criticism, he's going to say it. That's one of the reasons that we love Booger around here. And so you can't, as a player, be unwilling to, especially, being here in person. He was in the building. There's no scheduling excuse that you can come up with here. This is quite literally you just ducking away from what you perceive as a confrontation, and it makes no sense. And people will point to, is this personality-wise something that's going to reflect poorly on Myles Garrett? Is he shying away from the challenge? Is he going to, respond too much to criticism if he's the number one overall pick with all the expectation that gets lumped on that? And my point is that no NFL GM or player personnel member or anything in a position that's going to influence this decision for the Browns was watching Myles Garrett on any of our platforms the other day or saw that news about Myles Garrett and learned something new about him personality-wise. These people do their homework when it comes to making an investment of this size. They try and find out everything they can about the player's makeup. How much does a guy love football? What does he do on his off days? That's why you always hear stories about them talking to the custodian the custodian workers around the football facility or the lady that works at the front desk or whoever it is to try and get a read on who these guys are as people. And so at this point in the NFL pre-draft process, they've got most of those answers. So that wasn't some new revelation, even though the timing would suggest that there could be some sort of maybe mild association.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. Let's say I'm GM of the Cleveland Browns, Kevin Costner. We know he makes these draft decisions with his gut. And I've weighed all these things, and I understand. I've done my pre-draft homework. I've done the profiles. I've given the players Rorschach tests. I've done everything you could possibly do to get a handle on their personality. And I had these questions about Garrett. And I wondered. I was on the fence. I was, all right, his measurables are off the chart. Seems like a good dude, but I question a little bit of whether he's a workout warrior and not a guy who gets it done on Sunday. And I question his toughness a little bit. And then I hear about this, and that's the final straw, the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back.
I feel like we would have heard a lot more about this being a closer conversation if that had been the case all the way up to it. Now, we've been critical of the Browns and the way they handled some of the talk surrounding their number one pick, saying they weren't going to trade the number one pick and sort of showing their hand in a way that's usually not accustomed to in that number one spot. But for me, ultimately, no. I don't feel like and now listen, I say this understanding the source I'm about to talk about, but if you're any organization worth their salt, you're not going to be influenced by something as small of a plot point as this along the way, even if it does come towards the end of this. Now, that being said, the Browns do tend to brown at certain points in times throughout their franchise's history, especially recently.
Well, and the other side to that would be the conventional wisdom is if you think you've got the quarterback, we've seen people reach for quarterbacks before. Trubisky seems to be the in vogue guy because I've heard him linked to the Jets as well as a guy they like. So maybe he has just impressed people to the point where he sort of just had that standout coming out moment with North Carolina. Not exactly a school that's on everybody's mind when they're evaluating pro prospects. Maybe having gotten more information on him, having watched him a little bit more, he is just starting to rise. And with the premium that's put on quarterbacks, he's getting hot at the right time.
Well, and information on the right time, because we talk about one-and-dones in college basketball all the time, and I heard this get brought up this weekend, but the idea of why the NFL was complicit in making the 3-year minimum rule for college players in football, why they had to stay in college for 3 years. And one of that reason is because it allows you to build more of a book on these guys. And when you look at the quarterbacks coming out this year, Deshaun Watson is the only one with a really extended body of work here, and he's the one with all the college accolades and accomplishments. But that also gives NFL scouts a lot to nitpick, a lot to go look at, because they've got a lot of source material to work with there. Mitch Trubisky, you've got 1 year of starting quarterback play. Deshaun Kaiser, you've got 2 years of one and 3/4 really years of starting quarterback play to judge. And so you don't have nearly as much. You can play a lot more of the upside card, and then you get them in behind closed doors. You get them in workouts and meetings, places that if you're a good kid with a good head on your shoulders, it's an easy place to go in and shine. Like we've heard all of these guys have, Mitch Trubisky just has that added aspect of, all right, well, we can talk about him as the upside play here as well. My interest in this whole situation outside, because quarterbacks are always going to be interesting, is the sort of PR campaign that we've seen from the presumed number 1 overall pick really since the combine, maybe you could say the end of the season, in Myles Garrett. I don't know how often we see this from guys that are so far and away the locks where he's willing to be as vocal and open as he has been. There was the ESPN.com piece talking about him. We saw him do some carpool karaoke with one of our reporters here from ESPN, and now the whole car wash tour. And we've seen a lot of these prospects doing it, but it's a number 1 overall pick being very outspoken on a number of things in a way that feels odd to me.
Both of these guys are right out of central casting, right? I mean, Myles Garrett, 6'5", 271 defensive lineman. Trubisky, 6'3", 200-pound quarterback. They both fit the part if we're just casting the roles.
First and last, the podcast.
When I was at college, the Maryland Terrapins won the national championship. Things haven't been the same since, but the Maryland Terrapins are involved now with a team that recently won the national championship, and that would be the North Carolina Tar Heels.
Yeah, trying to ignite maybe a bit of old ACC rivalry here. Maryland, maybe this is a PR spin for Maryland to actually get people to wake up and remember that they are now in the Big Ten. This is something that I feel it goes overlooked far too often because Maryland has struggled largely in most if not all sports recently since that switch to that conference. And it's a good chance to remind everyone, they're not in the ACC, so they don't get to go against North Carolina all the time. So maybe President Lowe was sitting there saying, all right, this is my chance to get a shot back in there for old time's sake.
Wallace Lowe speaking on North Carolina and their academic scandal. Maybe it's also him saying, hey, we're academically pure. That's why we haven't achieved quite as much in the athletic department.
Doing it the right way.
But he said this about North Carolina. For the things that happened in North Carolina, this is a quote, it's abysmal. I would think that this would lead to the implementation of the death penalty by the NCAA, but I'm not in charge of that.
Hot takey to say the least. The death penalty is something that most notably gets associated with SMU and their football program, but we've seen over the course of different NCAA sports, I think 5 or 6 times in the history of the NCAA in various forms. I think 1 or 2 of them self-imposed also, but it's the highest level of penalty that exists where you'd suspend an entire program for the crimes that they've done. And here, I don't think there's any danger of that. I understand that for college people, the ultimate irony and hypocrisy of this situation is that you'd insinuate this because it has academic implications, knowing a bit of the, for lack of a better term, forget shadow curriculum, the shadow ideal of education and that value for the world of college athletics. But compared to its peers, between the things we've seen at Penn State and Baylor, the fact that if you were the NCAA and you'd levy a death penalty for what's going on here would comparatively rub a ton of people the wrong way, and rightly so.
Well, it's never fair to the people who come later and are punished and had nothing to do with it, right? And in a sense, it's always aspirin. It's not actually treating the root cause, it's treating the symptoms. And until the entire structure is fixed, these things are going to happen, and there is going to be controversy, and there are going to be recruiting violations, there are going to be academic scandals, there are going to be all these things because it's a big business. People want to say whatever they want about academics and learning and education and all, blah, blah, blah. No. With these major programs, has nothing to do with that. These are huge money-earning enterprises. We know how big a deal the NCAA tournament is. We know how big a deal the college football playoff is. And these schools are caking on the football programs and the basketball programs. So when you're talking about what they're doing, they want to bring in the best possible athletes to keep those programs up so that they can keep the revenues up. Therefore, the whole academic process becomes a farce because a lot of these kids are there to try and bolster their chance of going pro, which leads to the whole debate about free labor for the college kids playing. Until we fix that, and I don't know enough about it to tell you I have the perfect solution. I do believe athletes at that level need to be compensated in some way. I do believe that's the fair thing, especially when you're talking about all the other stuff that goes along with it and likenesses and the like. But until that is fixed, until that root problem is fixed, you're going to get a fever. You're going to get the symptoms. And things like giving the death penalty to North Carolina are just swallowing some Tylenol and hoping it goes away.
Well, and when you have all of those things that are touted by the NCAA, because you mentioned compensation, and when the means of compensation that you parrot, that you trumpet when you're the NCAA or these academic institutions is, well, we provide these kids with a free, quote-unquote free education, and all of a sudden, you're really compromising the very nature of that education by doing some of the things that North Carolina has been accused of throughout this process, by funneling kids into classes that don't exist so they can focus more on athletics and really just exist as student athletes in the name alone, which the name is a problematic history of its own. This is really something that is deserving of some high level of punishment for the people that have taken advantage, because this is, again, doing something like that. While people would say, this is the student athletes are complicit in this and they're just as much a part of it, that's taking advantage of the student athlete, because these kids were brought here for a reason. They were brought there to play sports at that university. And so when you give them the framework of then saying, you know what, that education we talk so much about, we're not going to place any value in that because we don't really care about that for you, all of a sudden they're not holding up on their end of the bargain. I understand that there's agency on the part of every kid that goes and plays a sport somewhere, and your education is what you make of it. But also putting the framework there for the adults involved is part of your responsibility. If you're saying this is the means of compensating these kids that are making you money hand over foot.
Look, if the university makes a ton of money, that can help the students there because they can put that money, they can funnel it into the university. But the students that are on the sports teams are not the reason or the impetus for that. And if you don't think it's about money, if you don't think it's about big business, especially with those athletic programs, 39 of the 50 states, the highest paid public employee is a university coach. In 39 of the 50 states in the United States. So these guys, these coaches are making bank. They are making bread, and that is not to teach.
No, it's people can lament that portion of the system all they want, but that's the reality we exist in. And so while all of this continues to happen and you can vacate wins, by the way, it's worth noting that the NCAA has really dragged their feet on the whole North Carolina process, but felt it pretty easy to come out and punish a Notre Dame team who self-reported a bunch of comparatively minor violations. Stay woke. But I don't know. For me, I can't get over that point first and foremost, but you're right. A lot of that, it's all wildly hypocritical to a certain end, and the wrong people end up getting punished, and that's why the death penalty, when it gets brought up, when you think about it, you can call that aspirin, but really, for me, that's the only way to hit them where it hurts, because we've seen what it does to a program like SMU, who has never recovered from that in a football sense. They'll enjoy some relative success, maybe, and they have in certain instances, but it's never going to be what it once was there, and that destroys a huge portion of the earning potential of a school, but it does it at the expense of so many others who aren't as responsible. But that's the only one that really gets close to getting this right, and that's unfortunate that it comes to that level. It would be much more beneficial for me to find creative ways to punish the people actually involved while still providing a bunch of opportunities for kids to still come there on scholarship, to have a chance to play, to have a chance to change their lives in a number of respects. But instead, it's really all we have. It's an all-or-nothing approach because besides that, you end up postseason banning a bunch of kids that weren't involved in the process half the time, like that's probably going to happen in the North Carolina case, and really not affecting change in any meaningful way.
First and last.
We figured we'd look for some gimmicks to spicing it up at the end of the NBA season. Timothy O'Connell tweets in, a fan as a coach like Whoopi Goldberg and Eddie. Chris Evans says the WNBA champs take on the team at the bottom of the standings. So what would be a gimmick that could work for the final night of the NBA regular season?
I think one quarter you just have the mascots play one-on-one, or you have everyone on the team wear the mascot outfit during the game to up the degree of difficulty. I think that would be an interesting one. I know people are a fan of mascot-related activities in general, so I think the more you can incorporate that in the game, the better.
What about the Knicks at home tonight? You actually draw a triangle on the court, and they have to play inside that triangle?
And all of them have the Illuminati dollar bill eye inside them, so people can get their internet meme game on absolute 10.
Or you could get chewed out by James Dolan night at the Garden.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Yeah, every fan could just walk up to James Dolan, he could chew them out and accuse them of being an alcoholic, and then you go on. With the game.
Or you could take the other side of that too and have people give him a chance, give those oversized boxing gloves and a chance to get in the ring with Charles Oakley. See if you can hang with one of the NBA's most feared enforcers.
Let's go to some of you guys. 888-729-3776. A gimmick to spicing up the end of the NBA season, which obviously has no meaning. Let's go to Ethan in Denver. Ethan, you're up first here on First and Last. Go ahead.
Morning, guys. Hey, get the local university kids on the court playing each other, and all the NBA players give their respective position players their game checks. The kids get some money.
That's how you pay the college kids?
Yeah, find a way to pay the players. I like it. Bringing a couple of different stories from the day together. I'm sure you get college kids signing up in a heartbeat. Now, would that one be more entertaining if it was actually college athletes or if it was like rec league players from a college campus?
Rec league What if you mix them up? I mean, I guess you could put some college players on the NBA roster on each team, because if it's college kids against an NBA team, we know they get blown out. So you'd have to figure out some way. Then you could really see who could hang at the NBA level. It'd be like a pre-draft evaluation.
Well, we already have the setup now where you can go to the pre-draft combine and do all those things and then decide to come back. So maybe we take this to the utmost extremes. You let them play one NBA game and then get to decide, all right, am I really about this life yet?
Let's go to Matt in Ohio. Matt, you're up next on the show. Go ahead, Matt.
Hey, guys, you need to have Charles Oakley suit up against the Knicks and have him go diving into the crowd right at Dolan to save a ball and just add fuel to the fire.
Ooh, I like the idea of where that can go in former player night. You get to redraft one of your former stars as a team for one night and put him out there on the court and say, so it gets to some of what we talked about before. Could you beat Oscar Robertson in a game of one-on-one? You could find out a lot of these things. We have all those players from the 80s and 90s that talk about how soft guys are. Go put a game check on it.
What about Eject a Legend night? You have like a whole bunch of legends come and the fans vote to see which legend gets taken out by security.
That does also involve a Jumbotron, which is what I feel like you should do. You need to involve as much of the in-stadium atmosphere, in-arena atmosphere as you can in whatever this gimmick ends up being. My favorite in-arena gimmick is the T-shirt cannon. So I think every team, you give each team 5 shots of a T-shirt cannon that they can shoot on the court at somebody during play to try and influence the outcome of the game. So you have to have a little bit of gamesmanship in there, too. When am I going to actually shoot my shot and try and figure out how to get the best outcome from it?
Let's go to Joe in Maine. Joe, you're up next on the show. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Good, man.
My gimmick is nothing.
Your gimmick is bad reception. Sorry. I didn't even know that still existed in today's day and age. I guess because I never use my cell phone for calls, so I don't fall into the trap of bad reception.
You just assume all those coverage maps that you used to see on cell phones commercials now just blanket the entire country.
Is there anything that annoys you more than someone calling you?
Oh, I mean, I usually only assume I'm getting a call if it's an emergency. Like, if I get that, or the worst is getting that text. If you get a text that says call me, you basically assume you're about to get the worst news on the planet.
No doubt. Let's go to Kent in Florida. Kent, you're up next on the show. Go ahead, Kent.
Had an idea, the last game, put the guys on donkeys, have a donkey basketball game, and have James Dolan run around with a shovel cleaning up after the donkeys.
Was that just a long setup for a gratuitous James Dolan shot? That sounds like
I was going to say, he wanted to get James Dolan in the vicinity of some poop, and he really just used donkeys as a vessel to get him there. I respect the creativity. Donkey Night would have a host of other problems, and I'm sure PETA wouldn't be too happy with you.
Nick Clements tweets in, hockey-style sub night, just allow subs without checking in at the table. Eric Hall says, have the franchises pay past players play the game. Who wouldn't love to see Jordan versus Bird again? Well, the Bulls aren't playing the Celtics tonight, but that would work. I mean, you could have who is the Celtics are playing the Bucks. Oscar Robertson could come back and go up against Larry Bird tonight.
You just have full-on 90s NBA nostalgia night where everything in the arena is done exactly how it would have been in the mid-90s. All of the players, all of the outfits. We're bringing back Zubas, starter jackets, the whole works. Everyone's got to talk on their, we'll have like beepers and pagers on hand.
You got to wear
Ice Cube's 3-on-3 league?
That is essentially the 3-on-3 league. Yes, I guess that's exactly what that's going to be. But just in not even in small arenas. I'm assuming they're using NBA arenas.
Are they not playing that outside? Isn't it in the summer?
Is it? I'm going to be honest, outside of seeing some of the names associated with that, not too familiar with the infrastructure, but that seems to be, well, I guess, you know what, based on the success or lack of success that enjoys, 90s night in the NBA to end the regular season, we could see this as a sort of a trial for that.
Yeah, what about taking it to the next level? Like, see who could tank the hardest night? What's the thing you could do to tank the most?
Actually play in an underwater fish tank the size of a basketball court. Basically turn it into a giant game of water polo with NBA players.
Isn't that what Harlem Globetrotter games are with the Washington Generals?
Do they don't play in water?
That is true.
No, but I'm talking about just like hardcore tanking.
People forget the Generals have been tanking for a long time now. There's never been any backlash there because LeBron James doesn't play for the Washington Generals.
That is true. That's a good point. I mean, that I don't know how anybody refutes that. Bobby in Ohio. Bobby, you're up next here on First and Last. Go ahead.
I say after halftime, all the players line up and play a game of horse. One right after another until everyone's eliminated except for one.
So horse instead of an actual game. They tried to. I think people have suggested that for NBA All-Star Weekend and the like. I don't think horse is as exciting as you think it is when you actually wind up watching it play. It's a little bit more fun to participate in. It's what old guys do when they're no longer able to play like real pickup, right?
Exactly. I would probably go for a game of knockout before I go for a game of horse as far as the entertainment value. And this one, I like Rolo Preto tweets in, put LeVar Ball versus Jordan one-on-one and see who's the GOAT once and for all. I think LeVar Ball night just in general, you have him start off maybe announcing the game so he can do what he does best, which is talk, and then have him sort of like a WWE character. He just slowly works his way onto the court in some big outlandish way and then gets to live out his fantasy of being an NBA player.
Yo, the way players would go at LeVar Ball if he was actually on the court, the dunks on LeVar Ball would be so filthy, people would get a lot of enjoyment.
Dunk on LeVar Ball night. You can come in, if you're a fan that can dunk, you can come in and just get out all of your hatred and venom for LeVar Ball by dunking on him, and then you can spin it and give the money to the charity or the Big Baller brand, which should basically be like a charity because it's such trash.
Or fans challenge LeVar Ball to one-on-one, and eventually a fan's going to beat him. I saw that video of him. He's not that good. So a fan is going to beat LeVar Ball.
Well, that was like, who was Brian Scalabrine, who's, posted up in Boston and would challenge, let fans come and play him one-on-one because he was that guy that most people, NBA fans, would like to try and say that they could beat in a match right there. LeVar Ball's version of that would be way more entertaining because he's obviously way worse at basketball.
First and Last.
Hey, it's Stugotz. Join us Wednesday. We have no guest. I have no idea what we're going to talk about. Sometimes those are the best shows. That's Wednesday on the Dan Le Batard Show with me, Stugotz, on ESPN Radio.
First and last, Robin Lundberg, Mike Golic Jr., Stugotz coming up on Mike and Mike. I guess that promo serves as a way of promoting him. I feel like I would get in trouble if I did that, but nevertheless.
Stugotz operates in, he's the Charles Barkley of our network. I think where he operates in the most unique space humanly possible because he can get away with saying that, and he's absolutely right. It'll be a great show. I know I actually heard that and was like, all right, you know what? I am more inclined to tune in today because of it. But, think about just him in comparison to the other guests that are coming up on Mike and Mike. There's another promo that they've been playing all morning on here that teases some of the other guests. Tell me if you can spot the difference between every other Mike and Mike guest and Stu Gatz.
Wednesday with Greeny and Golic. Todd McShay in studio to preview the NFL draft. And Damian Woody on what team should be drafting a quarterback. Plus Stu Gatz. It's Mike and Mike, starting at 6 Eastern on ESPN Radio and ESPN2.
Well, obviously, there's nothing behind him, right? It's like previewing the NFL draft, sizing up the NBA playoffs, and him.
Yeah, plus Stu Gatz should basically tell you everything you need to know about Stu Gatz as a character on this network. They have no idea what he's going to talk about. They definitely aren't going to be able to govern what he's going to be able to what he's going to say, but they're going to have him on there because they know that Stu Gatz is just going to be enough in and of himself.
Thank you for listening to the First and Last podcast. You can listen and subscribe to all ESPN podcasts in the Listen tab of the ESPN app. First and Last.